I just don't know if I could give this up. It's gonna be tough to give it up and go back and do regular stuff. It wasn't that much fun when I did it before. I don't know why I'd want to do it again. This is fun. As you know, Carolyn and I moved off grid about 3 years ago after we traveled the country in a truck camper. And we live in a little tiny house. And I've got 1,200 watts of solar panels here that I can run the freezer, a tablet, a couple phones, some fans, small fans, and the well pump. It's getting easier here all the time, I think. The solar panels, we're producing 1,200 watts now, and I'm getting all the energy out of them that I could possibly get now that I've added an extra charge controller. And to quickly go over that again, the one charge controller thought that I only had 100 amp hours of batteries, where I have 800 amp hours. So it was only allowing 25 amps from the solar panels to go into the battery, because you're only allowed to put 25% of your battery capacity into the battery. So the charge controller thought I had 100 amp hours. 25% would be 25 amps. Well, when I put two on, they both think I only have a 100 amp hour battery, and so it's allowing all the energy to go in there, 50 amps. Well, actually, when I turn the well on, it allows 58 amps to go in. Things are getting so much easier all the time. To kind of recap what we did the first year we got here, and this is important because if anybody wants to live off grid, I think this is what you're going to have to do. In yesterday's video, I was talking about how a family got isolated up in Colorado National Forest and froze to death or starved to death or something. They don't know yet. And I was saying that you need to kind of test yourself first before you go do things. And I still obviously agree with that statement. But this is not hard. Once you figure it out, it's really easy. And I see so many people on Facebook all the time telling me how hard it is. Oh my gosh, I gotta quit. I can't keep doing this. It's terrible. I had one person on Facebook said that the first year they were here, their crops failed and their chickens died and it was a complete failure. They had to move out. Well, you got to take it in steps. I mean, if you think about how I have progressed through life, I had solar panels on top of my house years ago when I was with my ex-wife, and I learned a lot about solar panels back then before solar panels were popular or even readily available. It was hard to find information. This was before YouTube. But now everybody's wanting to teach you how to install solar panels, and you can buy everything off Amazon or Walmart. If you can find somebody who's going to teach you where they don't talk over your head. So there was my first step, was learning how to do solar panels. And then we started the nomadic life, and I already knew all about DC electricity and campers. I understood how campers work, and I bought a little pop-up camper, and I had to rewire the whole thing and fix it up. But I ran off generators. I didn't run off solar panels. So what I did was, instead of using solar panels, I used a generator to power a battery charger. I have battery chargers just, I don't know if you can see it in the dark here. Basically those battery chargers there. And then the battery chargers charge battery, and I'd run an inverter to change the DC electric from the battery to AC electric, which is exactly what I do now, except instead of using a generator, I got solar panels. I can use a generator. 99.9999% of the time I'm using solar panels though, now that I've gotten them upgraded. So we traveled around, and that was pretty tough. It was a tough life, but the reason it was tough was because you were always having to research your next spot. That's what made it so difficult, was just the constant research, trying to find water, trying to find internet. I gotta have internet. I have a job to do. I still gotta make money. And I think that's where a lot of people get this disconnection from what off-grid is. Oh, if you're off-grid, you just stop everything. You get some people act like you gotta move to the moon in order to be off-grid. My thinking is I wanna be disconnected from people so I don't have to rely on them. I don't wanna have to rely on grocery stores. I do go to the grocery store, but I don't wanna rely on them. I don't wanna rely on the electric company. And I don't even rely on them. I do have to get gasoline for the generators or propane for the generators, but I don't have to rely on them. So I just don't want to rely on it. So that's my definition of off-grid. But if you want to be completely isolated away from the world, you still got to take it in steps. I mean, when we got here, my first priority, very first priority, before we did anything, we moved here in this little truck camper, we're going to tear that down pretty soon, was I had to get that thing heated for the winter. We moved here in March or April, I guess it was March 1st or something like that. But we had to be ready for next winter. So I built an outdoor heat exchanger for that camper. It's not where I wanted to live. I didn't want to live in that thing. But I knew I wasn't going to have a tiny house ready. So I got an old Franklin wood stove and I made an outdoor heat exchanger, and we started splitting wood and cutting wood, splitting wood and cutting wood. And we had 8 cords. Of course, it was very inefficient. It used all 8, but we had heat. While I was heating the camper, I was building the tiny house. So you had to do it in steps. You had to think, what is the priority? Well, one of the things was the priority was getting that well to work. I think if you're going to live off grid, you have to immediately know how to get water. I've missed a step here that I want to talk about. If you're going to live off grid, you have to have some sort of savings, and you got to be debt free. That way, if something goes wrong, you get into the winter time and your wood stove doesn't work, something doesn't work, whatever, you can always go to a hotel room. You can always leave the place for the winter. Maybe go get an apartment, whatever it is you need to do. But you got to be able to say, okay, that didn't work. Let's recoup. We can't just sit here and die freezing to death. Being logical that you might fail is very important, but it doesn't make this hard. So we got the tiny house built, and then the next summer we started working on chickens. And once we got that pretty much mastered, we could move on to other projects. And this year I upgraded the solar panels and got them working better. But I think what a lot of people do is they come out here and they expect everything to happen at once. Somebody said that this was again on Facebook, people fail living off grid. Most people fail. And I think, how is this possible? I don't do anything around here hardly. I mean, I got my chores, and I look at my chores like that's my job. One of my chores is make YouTube videos. I mean, that's where I actually get paid. Think about this. If I was at an employer, I'd be working, I was working 14, 16 hours a day, every day. So I'd be working, killing myself. I don't even know if I'd still be alive. I mean, I was just way out of shape, and the weight was packing on a little bit. I was heading for a heart attack. The stress was overwhelming. So, nothing else. This is a good insurance plan to live longer. I traded in my employer to live here to be self-employed, taking care of the chickens. So, I get up in the morning at 5 o'clock. I come down, I check the batteries, make sure that nothing happened overnight. Make sure I still got a good enough charge that I can make it till daylight. If I can't make it to daylight for whatever reason, when Carolyn's son was here, there was a pretty common occurrence that he'd leave the lights on at night and we'd get pretty low on the battery charge. So I'd start the generator for an hour, half hour, 45 minutes, somewhere around there, just to get the batteries up so we can make it to daylight. Then I go over and I open up the chicken coop door. That's it. I sit around a good portion of the day trying to figure out what kind of video I'm going to make. That's my job. So this is the hardest thing I do. One of the things that people complain about is I need to cut the grass more often. Well, that's the great thing about living off grid is no, I don't. I mean, there could be a risk of snakes, don't get me wrong, but the neighbors are not going to complain. I wish I could show you the neighbor's yard. It's way overgrown. They haven't mowed that yard since they moved here. So I don't want to wear out my equipment, so I only run the lawnmower every couple weeks, every 3 weeks. That lawnmower's, this is the third summer, I guess it's second, anyway. And I just now reached 50 hours on it, where I needed to do all that maintenance on it. So I try not to abuse my equipment. It just doesn't need to be overdone around here. Now, somebody's going to say, well, you need to cut it more often, otherwise you're going to wear out the lawn more. Well, you just go slower. I mean, it's just not that complicated. I don't want to waste a lot of gas either, because gas is expensive. That lawnmower uses about 1.5 gallons of gas to cut this property. That's the other thing. Is everybody wants to go get these big pieces of property. Oh, I'm going to get 20 acres. You're making it too difficult. It's going to be hard to maintain. You're going to be mowing all the time. You're going to have brush hogs and maintenance costs on brush hogs and tractors. And I know about tractors. I was raised with tractors. My grandparents had tractors. They were always broken. Always. And when I got older, I was a young adult that just got out of the Navy, came home, and Grandpa bought this Ford. And it had a bucket lift on it. Oh man, that was a lot of fun. I mean, I really had a good time on it. But it seemed like every week something was breaking on it. One time was scooping up, I don't remember what I was scooping up, and the hydraulic filter was underneath the tractor, and I didn't know it at the time. And I'm moving it along, and all of a sudden that bucket just fell down. What the heck's going on? So I looked underneath there trying to figure out what was going on, and I ripped off that filter. So I had to go get a new filter and the whole piping system and everything, and the hydraulic fluid. Oh my goodness, I think it held 10 gallons of hydraulic fluid. It was a lot. And that cost me, I'm thinking for some reason, $300. That's expensive. And you're always repairing things. Well, if you minimize your life and you downsize just to the bare essentials, we got 1.5 acres here. And I took you out in the woods yesterday. I'll put it up next box to that video. I took you out in the woods yesterday. It's beautiful. Then I just got a little bit of yard. We're gonna have the chickens and the solar panels, the tiny houses up underneath trees. I don't even think half the yard needs to be mowed, or half the property, I should say. But people seem to think that they gotta have tons of acreage. They wanna be out there in the middle of nowhere. Whatever your dream is, but I don't know why you'd need much more than 5 acres. Well, I know a lot of people want to have a vegetable garden. Carolyn and I are carnivores, so that doesn't really apply to us. We've tried sunflower seeds 2 years in a row now, and we just hadn't had a lot of success, but that would be for the chickens, so they can get their protein in the wintertime. So after I make my video, I edit it, watch my YouTube channel, make sure when the video releases every day, and then about 3 o'clock we eat. 5 o'clock we watch a couple hours of TV, then I come down here, I feed the chickens, make sure they got water for the next day. By this time they're already in the coop. They go to the coop themselves. I don't have to put them away, they put themselves away. All I do is shut the door to the chicken coop so no wild animals can harm them overnight. And then I just start over the next day. It's just not that difficult. One of the things I didn't mention is I do fill the IBC tank up with the well water every day. But man, that is just not hard. I come down here, I flip a switch, I put a hose in the tank and let it fill up, come down here, flip a switch, it's done. Nothing's hard. And I can't understand, I failed. Well, the reason people are failing is they're biting off more than they can chew all at once. They come down here with this big goal of having to do all of it. There shouldn't be that much to living off grid. But you got to minimize your life. You can't have all the big toys, and you're just not going to do it. I mean, I know there's these big YouTubers out there, and they got these huge farms, and I mean, I know one guy, he has employees. They're not on video very often, but he has employees. So he's a homesteader. If you're coming down here to think you're going to do all it by yourself, replacing society, you got to remember, that's what we're talking about. You're going to replace society. You're going to replace your food growth. So you're going to take the place of your farmer who stocks the shelves at the store. You're going to prepare your food. So you got to can it. We can, but you know, we do that in our spare time whenever we get a chance. As a matter of fact, we were going to get pigs. Of course, we don't have a lot of refrigeration, so we have to keep this in mind that we would have to butcher the pigs when it's colder. And then we'll have 2 pigs or 1 pig, whatever we're going to do. And we got to get all that canned up before the food rots. So it would be hanging out here, attracting animals. Of course, you got it up in a tree. They should stay away from it, but you want to make sure the animals stay away from it. And so then you're cutting up slices, and we would end up doing 80 jars a day, 2 batches. Well, 1 batch, when I do chicken, I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I immediately start cooking the chicken. Now, pork's not that hard. Of course, you'd have to cut the pork up so you can get it in the jar. But with chicken, you got to cook it, at least I do. So you boil it, and then you get it off the bone and you put it in a jar. With the pork, all you'd have to do is cut it up, put it in a jar, and then you could cold pack it is what it's called. But you'd be at it all day for days. That's overworking yourself. that was a bad plan. It was just a terrible plan. So what Carolyn and I do is we raise chickens, and when we're ready to butcher chickens, we butcher 5 or 6 chickens, 4 or 5 chickens, not too many, just enough that when we get up the next morning, because you got to let them rest for 24 hours, so you put them in the refrigerator. Now we would put them in the cooler because we don't have the fridge. That way the rigor mortis would break loose on them. You cook them, you can them, and then the next day you would butcher the next batch. But a lot of people, they'll butcher all the chickens and try to get them all done in one day, and you're just overwhelmed, and then you end up failing. Take it small. Minimize your life. Stop trying to bite off more you can chew. So if you'll click this up next box, it'll take you to a video where I was talking about those folks that got stuck out in the national forest in Colorado and died. So if I can inspire you to take it in small bites so you can live your dreams. Thanks for watching.